The shed is still cold from the night, and your fingers feel the smooth neck of a small oil bottle before the first loom begins to move. In the dim light of late 19th century Kyoto, the air holds silk dust, old wood, and the faint sweetness of lamp smoke. You have come in before dawn for a job so narrow that most people in the city would never think to name it. You are the loom oiler, moving quietly between Nishijin weaving frames, checking shuttle races, treadle pivots, heddle joints, and the worn places where wood turns against wood. Nothing about the work is hurried, because too much oil is nearly as troublesome as too little. Even the first rule of the morning sounds strangely strict, that the oil must be warmed in the hand and never poured cold onto the loom. At first it seems fussy, almost ceremonial, until you notice how chilled oil sits thick, darkens lint, and threatens expensive silk. So before the workshop fully wakes, you begin to learn that these odd little rules were built from touch, patience, and long memory. You stand for a moment beside the door, bottle cupped in both hands, letting your own warmth loosen the oil while the room stays still around you. The looms are tall and patient in the half-light, their beams rubbed smooth by years of hands, shoulders, sleeves, and passing cloth. Each frame has its own small voice, even before work begins, and part of your trade is knowing those voices before they speak too loudly. You don't begin at the nearest loom. You begin where the foreman always begins his glance, at the back row where the finer figured silk is set up, because those looms carry the orders that can least forgive a stain. The bottle is unstoppered only a little, never wide, and you tip one drop onto a folded scrap of cloth instead of onto the wood. That is the next rule, and it arrives so early in the day that it feels almost like prayer. Oil the cloth first, not the loom, unless the joint is hidden from silk. The reason is plain. As soon as dawn grows enough to show surfaces clearly, a falling drop can travel farther than you think. It can darken a thread, creep into lint, or leave a mark that will wait until noon to reveal itself on pale woven ground. So you touch the damp cloth to the first shuttle race, and only the shine of it changes. Then you move to the treadle pivot below, where the wood has a dry whisper when pressed by hand. One touch there, no more. The root is fixed in your body before it is fixed in words. Back row first, then the side nearest the paper screens, then the center lane, then the looms closest to the entrance, where dust comes in on sandals and cold air stiffens everything by the threshold. You were taught to walk the same path each morning because memory likes a straight road. If you change the order, you forget what was done. If you forget what was done, you oil twice. And if you oil twice, the loom may run quietly for an hour and badly for a week. By the time you reach the third frame, the darkness has begun to thin into a soft blue behind the high windows. A woman at the winding stand enters without speaking, bows to the room more than to anyone in it, and begins to check the prepared thread. She notices your cloth, glances at the bottle, and lifts one brow just slightly when she sees how little you've used. That, too, is part of the work. If the others think you are lavish with oil, they won't trust you near white silk. At the fourth loom, you hear the first concrete warning of the day. Not a squeak, not yet. A drag, soft and regular, from the lower left, as if a sleeve hem were brushing a board once every few breaths. You don't touch the bottle, you kneel and press the treadle by hand, slowly, then let it rise. The sound doesn't return. You press again, a little faster. Still nothing. That means the loom is not speaking from dryness alone, and the rule for that is older than the youngest workers in the shed. Never oil a sound you cannot summon twice. So you stand and wait, because the weaver assigned to this frame has not yet arrived, and only full motion will tell the truth. Waiting is harder than oiling. Oiling feels like action. Waiting feels like uncertainty dressed as obedience. But in this room, restraint is part of the craft, and the men who ignore that usually spend their afternoons wiping mistakes from lacquered wood. The first weavers come in one by one, carrying the outside air with them. Their sleeves smell faintly of charcoal braziers, wet earth from the lane, and breakfast rice packed quickly in the dark. Someone slides open a panel for light. Someone else checks the pattern notes tied near a figured harness. There are coughs, soft greetings, the knock of a reed being adjusted, the dry little click of thread tools set on a shelf. Then the pattern master enters. He doesn't move quickly, but everyone notices when he is in the room. He carries a thin stick for pointing, not for striking, and his attention goes first to the mounted pattern aids near the more complex looms. When he begins his low corrections, calling count and alignment in a voice meant to carry without rising, the shed changes. It is no longer a still place preparing for work. It has become a place listening to itself. The first loom starts in the front row, almost shyly. A treadle goes down, the shuttle passes. The beater comes forward, then another takes up the rhythm, and another after that, until the whole shed fills with layered wooden speech. No two looms are exactly alike in sound, though they perform nearly the same labor. One has a firmer knock from a replaced beam. One has a faint ring where a metal pin was fitted years ago. One speaks with a smoother throat because a senior mechanic shaped its bearing surfaces so carefully that the movement seems cushioned. This is when your work changes. Before dawn, you oil by memory. After the room wakes, you oil by listening. And there is a strict rule for this part as well, one that sounds almost absurd until you live beside weaving long enough to hear the sense in it. Do not chase every squeak across the floor like a cat after beetles. Stand still first. Listen to the whole room. Only then choose where to go. So you stand with the bottle closed and the cloth folded twice over in your hand. At first, the noise is too broad to separate. Clatter and knock, wood and thread. Treadles pressing in uneven human rhythm, the calling of counts from the pattern master at the back, the soft hiss of silk shifting from one state of tension to another. Then, slowly, the room opens. You begin to hear individual places inside the larger sound. A dry pivot speaks sharply and at the same point in each cycle. A loose thread skims and vanishes. A hurried foot makes a loom sound harsher than it is. An overfilled joint makes not a squeak but a gummy reluctance, as if the motion were walking through syrup. This is why the rule exists. A careless oiler can hide a real fault. A drop of oil on a loom being woven too hard may quiet the complaint for a few minutes, and in that silence the wrong habit continues. The loom suffers, the silk suffers. And the oiler becomes the sort of helper no one wants. Near the center lane, one of the younger weavers glances toward you after a single squeal from his treadle board. He expects you to come. You don't. The pattern master is speaking corrections at that very moment, and another workshop rule binds your feet. Never oil a loom while corrections are being called, unless the same changed sound appears twice in the same place. The first time can belong to hesitation. The second time belongs to the machine. So you wait through a few more throws of the shuttle. The squeal does not return. Instead, the weaver's left foot changes angle, his next treadle stroke lands flatter, and the loom settles into its proper note. Had you rushed in, you would have touched wood that was not dry, interrupted a correction, and perhaps left a stray mark where none was needed. The younger weaver notices. He doesn't smile, but he stops looking at you like a servant with a bottle, and starts looking at you like a man who might know the room in a different way. That small shift matters. Trust in a weaving shed is built from tiny refusals. By full morning light, the silk threads begin to show their true colors. The pale ones are almost silver, until the angle changes. The deeper dyed threads hold the light with more gravity. Near the back row, one loom is dressed for formal obi cloth, and you can see at once that it has been marked for closer attention. A short black cord is tied to the upright near the foreman's usual station. That means inspection. Not because something is wrong yet, but because the cloth on that frame is costly enough that the foreman wants every pair of hands in the room to remember it. You were told about such looms on your first week. They have their own rule: approach only from the left side, and only after a full pattern repeat. At first it sounded like workshop superstition. Left side, right side, what could it matter if your hand is careful? But now, in the better light, the answer is easy to see. On the right side, The hanging threads and paper pattern aids crowd the space close to the race. A sleeve, a cloth corner, even a breath too near could set something trembling. On the left, there is room to kneel and reach with control. And if you wait until the shuttle has completed a full repeat, you know whether a sound belongs to one part of the pattern or to the motion itself. You don't have to guess. The black cord loom runs cleanly for a while. You keep it in the edge of your hearing without staring at it. Then, during a longer sequence, the sound comes. Not a squeak this time. A soft repeating drag, almost hidden inside the normal work of the frame. It appears only after several passes, then disappears again when the pattern changes. That makes it more troublesome, because irregular sounds tempt the hand. They ask to be fixed at once, but the rule holds you back. A sound that appears only in long pattern runs must be heard through the whole repeat before any oil is considered. So you stay where you are and count the rhythm, not with numbers on your lips, but by the return of motion. The same lift, the same pass, the same settling of wood into load. There it is again. Same place, same soft drag from the lower run of the shuttle race. Now you can move. You cross the lane without haste, because haste makes others look up, and nothing unsettles a weaver more quickly than a man with a bottle arriving at speed. The weaver at the black cord loom doesn't stop. He only shifts his knee a little to give you space. That is another kind of trust. To touch a working loom at all, while silk is under tension, means someone believes your hands won't make a larger problem. You kneel on the left side only. You wait through one full repeat again, just to be sure. The drag returns exactly where it did before. A brush would be too broad here. The usual folded cloth would be clumsy, so you choose a different tool. One kept for fine work, a slender bamboo sliver, its tip wrapped in a threadbare bit of soft cloth and dampened with only the smallest trace of warmed oil. This is a decision point, though no one in the room announces it. You can leave the sound alone and report it at midday, risking wear on the loom but avoiding any chance of a mark. Or you can touch the race now, lightly, and trust your hand. The drag has already repeated. The rule permits action. You decide to act. The bamboo tip goes to the worn place for less than a heartbeat. Not a drop falls. Not a shine is visible unless you know where to look. You withdraw, wait, and listen. The loom runs through the next sequence. Then the next. The drag eases, not vanished entirely, but softened enough that the motion no longer sounds burdened. For a few breaths, that seems to be the end of it. Then you see something no larger than a fingernail crescent, just below the race where old lint has darkened almost imperceptibly. Not a stain on silk. Not yet. Only a faint oil-dark arc where dust and the tiniest excess have met. To anyone passing quickly, it is nothing. To a foreman trained to distrust little signs, it is a written message. You wipe nothing. That is also a rule. Fresh signs are evidence. A wiped sign is suspicion. So you stand, step back, and let the loom continue. The foreman notices the black cord before he notices you. His eyes travel to it whenever he crosses the room, out of habit, then down to the lane, then to your hands. He does not interrupt. He only comes close enough to see the race from an angle, and you know at once that he has found the crescent. He says nothing. Silence from a foreman is rarely ease. It is storage. He will place the fact in his mind and wait until there is a ledger open before speaking. That changes the shape of the morning. You continue your rounds, but now every cloth touch feels more visible. Every bottle tilt feels as if it has a witness. The younger workers don't notice, the older ones do. One of the senior weavers glances from the black cord loom to the foreman, then to you, and returns to his work without expression. The room keeps moving. Shuttles pass. Pattern calls rise and fall. Outside, the lane has fully woken, though only faintly through the walls. Cartwheels, distant sandals, a vendor's voice stretched thin by the hour. Inside, your trade becomes narrower. You are no longer only oiling, you are accounting for a touch already made. So you take greater care with the next looms. At one treadle pivot, You hear dryness but wait for the second cycle. It returns. You apply a trace of oil to cloth, then wood, then wipe the surrounding surface twice with a clean corner. At another frame, a pin gives a metallic tick, and you leave it untouched because the sound belongs not to friction but to slight looseness in the fitting. That, too, must go in memory for midday report. Your cloth begins to warm from your hand and the room. Its folded layers hold more than oil now. They hold dust, faint resin, lamp soot lifted from surfaces you can barely see. You remember another of the workshop's odd rules, one that seemed excessive when first told to you. If the oil touches the wiping cloth twice on the same round, the cloth must be exchanged even if it looks clean. At first you had thought that the foreman simply liked rules because rules made him feel useful, but by now the cloth tells its own story. It looks almost clean. Still, the fibers are no longer innocent. A clean-looking rag in a silk shed can be dirt waiting for light. So before noon, though there is still usable space on the fold, you set that cloth aside and take a new one from the box near the post. The foreman sees that too. He says nothing again, but this silence feels different. Not forgiving, not condemning, only measuring. And as the pattern master lowers his voice and the room settles into the steadier rhythm that comes before the midday pause, you begin to understand that the real test will not happen at the loom. It will happen at the ledger, where every touch must become words. When the bell for the midday pause finally sounds, it doesn't ring loudly. It is only a small struck note, almost lost beneath the last few loom strokes. One shuttle finishes its pass, then another. Then the shed loosens, not into silence all at once, but into many smaller sounds that had been waiting underneath. Feet slide back from treadles, sleeves brush wood, someone exhales through the nose, long and tired. A lunchcloth is untied. A cup is set down on a beam with great care, because no one wants tea near silk. You close the oil bottle before you move. That habit is so settled in your hand that you do it without thought. Stopper in. Bottle wiped at the neck. Cloth folded inward so the used side disappears. Only then do you cross toward the foreman's desk, which is not really a desk at all, only a broad-planed board near the wall, with a ledger, an inkstone, brushes, and a stack of old paper for notes. The foreman is already there. He is not hurried either. That would suggest temper. Instead, he has arrived in the ordinary way, which is harder to read. His sleeves are still clean. His left thumb rests along the edge of the open ledger. The page is ruled by hand, each loom listed by position, by cloth type, by the brief marks that stand for checks, stoppages, thread faults, and maintenance touches. It is a modest book, plain paper, dark thread at the spine. But half the discipline of the workshop lives inside it. You wait until he looks up. He gives the smallest tilt of his head, enough to say that your place is here now. The brush is laid beside the entry line for the black cord loom. There is no separate mark for worry. There is no column for hesitation. Only time, action, amount, and reason. The simplicity of that is what makes it difficult. You cannot hide inside many words. You can only choose which true words to write. Around you, the others begin their meal. Rice from wooden boxes, pickled radish, a little salted fish for the older men who can afford it. Someone at the winding stand laughs once, softly, then remembers the room near the ledger and quiets again. The smell of food mixes with silk dust, lamp soot, and the dry grain scent of the looms warming under the day. The foreman says, very gently, that you touched the race on the black cord. It is not phrased as a question. You answer that you did. He asks what tool. You tell him bamboo sliver, cloth wrapped, warmed oil, only a trace. He asks when. You tell him after a full repeat, then again after hearing the drag in the same place. He asks why you did not wait for the pause. You feel at once that there are two possible roads in front of you. The first is easy. You could say the sound had worsened. You could say the loom felt close to binding. You could say immediate touch was safer than delay. A foreman may question judgment, but he usually prefers certainty. The second road is narrower. You could say what really happened, which is less grand and more difficult to defend. The drag was slight, the rule allowed action. You believed the touch would ease wear without risk. And you saw the lint crescent only after the application. That answer leaves room for your own doubt. It offers him a place to blame you if he wishes. The workshop waits without seeming to wait. No one has turned to listen, yet the room knows where attention is gathered. You choose the narrower road. You tell him the sound was soft, repeating only on the longer run. You tell him that waiting might also have been justified. You tell him you decided to act because the drag had returned in the same place and because the left side approach gave you a clean angle. Then you tell him about the crescent. Small. Below the race. Lint darkened, not silk. Not wiped. The foreman listens with his eyes lowered to the page. He does not interrupt. When you are done, he wets the brush, grinds it once in the ink, and writes with quick, compact strokes. He writes the time first, then the loom mark, then a note so short that it almost hurts to see your whole decision reduced to a few neat signs. Tested after repeated drag, fine application, lint darkened, observed. He lets the brush rest. Then he asks to see the cloth you used on that round, not the bamboo, the wiping cloth. That request carries more weight than the others. The cloth is evidence of habit. A man may make one poor choice with a fine tool and still be careful by nature. But the cloth shows whether his care had already begun to thin. You unfold it on the board. One side touched at the first looms, a second fold darkened later. A cleaner corner still visible, and the edge where fresh oil had been added before the cloth was exchanged. The foreman studies it as if reading weather signs in a stream. He does not need to see visible dirt. He is looking for sequence, one wet touch, then another, then a longer use than he prefers. He taps the cloth with the back of one fingernail. If oil touches the cloth twice on one round, he says, it is no longer the same cloth. You answer that you changed it before noon. He says yes, but not before the black cord loom. There it is, not shouted, not embellished, only placed between you both like a small wooden block. You could say that the cloth still had clean folds. You could point out that no stain reached silk. You could remind him that the drag had eased. All of that would be true, and none of it would help much. Because he is not measuring whether you caused visible damage. He is measuring whether you understood how damage begins before it can be seen. He asks you to bring the cloth from the box, the fresh one you took after the touch. You do. He compares them side by side. One with use hidden in the threads, the other crisp and nearly blank. Then he says the rule is not about visible dirt. It is about what the hand stops noticing. A used cloth feels familiar. A familiar cloth makes the hand bolder. The bolder hand reaches one loom too far. That is how expensive marks begin. He closes the ledger halfway, not all the way. That means the matter is still open. A full closing would mean judgment has been entered. This half-closed state is worse. It means the book may yet need more words. He asks one last thing. Could the drag have belonged to pattern load rather than dry contact? This is the true question beneath all the others. Did you quiet a symptom that belonged to weaving, not friction? Did you put oil where diagnosis should have gone first? You answer as carefully as you can. You say that the drag appeared at the same return in the long repeat. You say it seemed to come low, near the race, not above in the thread field. You say the easing after touch suggested friction. Then, because the truth asks it, you add that suggestion is not proof. The foreman nods once. That tiny nod contains more respect than comfort. A man who can admit uncertainty is often worth teaching. A man who hides it is expensive. He tells you to eat while the rice is still warm. But he does not dismiss the matter. He says that after the pause, the black cord loom will be watched through another repeat before a decision is entered. For a moment, that sounds almost merciful. Then you understand what it actually means. The loom may be stopped, not because the cloth is ruined, because the room can no longer trust what it heard. A loom, under question, changes everyone around it. If it continues, every later floor may point backward to this touch. If it stops, the order falls behind. Either way, the cost has already begun. You take your meal to the side lane and sit on an overturned crate near the open panel. The rice is plain and still a little warm in the center. There are pickles sharp enough to wake the mouth, and a sliver of dried fish that tastes of salt and smoke. Outside, the lane carries midday traffic now. Sandals, cartwheels, a boy calling out bean curd, a broom somewhere on stone. The workshop behind you has the strange sound of machines resting while their operators keep breathing beside them. You eat slowly, not because you are calm, because a meal taken too fast under worry sits badly. Across from you, an older weaver with thick wrists and narrow eyes opens his lunchcloth and says, without looking up, that the black cord loom has been thirsty for weeks. You glance at him. He keeps his gaze on the rice in his hand. He says the lower run always sounded heavier in humid weather, not enough to complain about, enough to remember. Then he says something even more useful. The loom's last full cleaning was delayed during a busy month, and delayed again when a temple order came in, and after that no one wanted to stop a frame that was still producing acceptable cloth. This is how neglect enters a good workshop. Not through laziness, but through useful postponement. One day is borrowed from maintenance, then another. Nothing terrible happens, so another day is borrowed. He chews and swallows before adding that a loom can run respectably while becoming wrong inside. That sentence stays with you, because it is true of many things and because it offers a different shape to the morning. Perhaps your touch did not create a problem. Perhaps it only outlined one. Still, that does not free you. A man may reveal a weakness and still have revealed it clumsily. At the far side of the room, the pattern master eats by himself, not from pride, simply from habit. He reads a small folded paper while chewing. Perhaps counts, perhaps notes, perhaps corrections he will call later. Even at rest, he belongs partly to the cloth. The foreman remains at the ledger. He does eat, but with one hand only, the other turning back to earlier pages. You know what he is checking. Not just your line, other entries for the same loom, dates, touches. Remarks too brief to be helpful unless one already knows the machine. Dry on damp day, minor drag, left race wiped, delay for order. The book cannot remember everything. No book can. But it preserves enough to let suspicion settle in the right direction. The pause ends not with a bell this time, but with people finishing and putting things away. Lunch cloths tied, tea swallowed, hands wiped. Bodies returning to stations. The loom room gathers itself again, slower than in the morning, because food and warmth make motion heavier for a few minutes. You stand before the black cord loom with the foreman and the weaver assigned to it. The senior mechanic has been called over as well. He is a small man with forearms polished by years of wood dust and oil. He does not speak at once. He crouches. He looks under the race without touching. Then he presses a treadle by hand, then another, then rises and says, "Only run it." The weaver settles in. The pattern master gives a short glance of annoyance at the interruption, then accepts it. The shuttle begins, pass, beat, return. Pass, beat, return. All of you listen. The whole room continues around this one point of attention, but your hearing narrows until the rest becomes a far wooden weather. The long repeat comes. You know exactly where the drag had been. The first cycle passes nearly clean, then the second, then faintly, there it is again, softer than before. Not gone. The senior mechanic lifts one finger for the weaver to continue. A third cycle. Again the same low-burdened whisper. At that, the mechanic looks not at the race but at the foreman, and the foreman looks at the ledger. That exchange is enough. The loom is stopped. Not abruptly, not in disgrace, simply stopped, as one closes a door that should not remain open. The weaver sits back. His face is unreadable, though the set of his mouth tells you what lost output feels like. The pattern master comes over at last, more irritated by delay than alarmed by defect. He asks where in the repeat the sound appears. You show him. He asks whether the drag changes with foot pressure. The weaver says no. He asks whether thread tension was altered this morning. Again, no. The mechanic kneels once more and places his ear near the lower frame while the treadle is moved by hand. Then he asks for paper, not brush paper, waste paper, something soft. A folded sheet is brought. He slides it along the underpath and draws it back. The edge comes away with a grey-brown streak. Old oil, lint, fine dust. Not enough to fall on the cloth. Enough to say that something below has been storing years more than days. The foreman does not look at you when he speaks. He says the loom will be stripped in part. The afternoon order will wait. The note will stand in the ledger. No one argues. That is another strange feature of good workshops. When enough evidence gathers, argument often becomes quieter, not louder. The decision is expensive. Therefore, it is made without decoration. You fetch the maintenance tray. It is shallow and lacquer worn thin at the corners. In it lie cloths, folded paper, bamboo slivers, a small brush, a tin cap for measured oil, a handful of shaped pegs, and a narrow scraper whose edge is smoother than sharp. The mechanic asks for ash as well. A little bowl is brought from the brazier room where fine clean ash is kept for polishing and lifting residue. You had once thought ash belonged only to hearths and winter. Now you know it belongs to silk too. The loom is not dismantled theatrically. There is no cascade of parts, only patient unfastening, a sideboard removed, a guide lifted, a pin eased free and set in order on cloth, never directly on the floor. The weaver watches, then turns away to help at another frame until his own can return. That is how work continues. No one is allowed the luxury of standing over one problem too long, but you remain. You must remain. Your hand entered the story, so your hand will help uncover the rest. Under the frame boards, the air is cooler and smells older. Less of silk, more of settled oil, dry wood, and the faint mineral scent of dust that has not seen light for many seasons. The lower bearing path is exposed bit by bit. At first, it looks merely dark. Then your eyes adjust. The darkness is not uniform. It has layers. There are glossy patches where fresh traces have joined old films. There are dull ridges where oil dried and thickened. And in one collar, near the shaft, there is a compacted ring of lint so pressed and glazed that it resembles felt. The mechanic touches it with the scraper. It does not crumble. It lifts in a single reluctant peel. There is a small sound when it comes away, like paper pulled from lacquer. Beneath it, the wood is polished unevenly, one side brighter, one side scored with the faintest crescent wear. There is the answer, or part of it. Not simple dryness, not one neglected morning, layer over layer of yesterday's oil mixed with silk dust, held in place by just enough fresh oil to stay sticky, a paste, a quiet grinding paste. The rule you heard in your first week returns with humiliating clarity. Never add fresh oil until yesterday's oil has been lifted away. At the time, it sounded wasteful. Surely fresh oil could soften what remained. Surely lubrication was lubrication. But this underframe makes the lesson plain. Old oil does not vanish because it grows thin. It stays. It takes dust into itself. It becomes a place for grit to sleep until motion wakes it. The mechanic uses folded paper first. He presses, lifts, folds, presses again. The paper darkens. He discards each piece after one pass. No rubbing yet, only lifting. Then he uses the ash with a soft cloth, very little, turning the cloth constantly so loosened residue does not return to the wood. The foreman watches the pace of this more than the result. Too much zeal in cleaning can score a surface. Too little leaves what caused the trouble. Measured strokes, measured breaths. The room around you resumes its broader labor. Looms run. Corrections are called. A tray is carried past. Tea is poured in a back room. But at this opened frame, time has become narrower. Each small, dark trace removed reveals another beneath. The mechanic asks when the last cleaning was entered. The foreman checks. The answer is longer ago than either prefers. not scandalously long, just long enough to explain the condition. There were touch-ups, yes, minor notes, quick wipes, but no full lift of residue from the underpath. The delay belongs to many useful days layered together, just as the residue does. That realization spreads blame so widely that it also softens it. This is not one man's negligence. It is a system leaning too hard on its own good luck. Still, the ledger will hold one visible hinge point, and that hinge point is your morning entry. You help by cutting narrow slips of paper and handing clean cloths as asked. At one point, the mechanic lets you hold the oil cap while he tests the now clean surface with a fingertip. Dry enough to speak honestly. Not so dry it must stay that way. He asks for one drop. Only one. You pour into the cap, not onto the wood. He dips the wrapped bamboo tip and touches the bearing path in two places, then waits. That waiting surprises the younger helper who has come over to watch. The boy expects immediate testing. The mechanic does not move. Oil that is applied must settle. Wood must take it. Excess must show itself, if it intends to travel. Only after a little stillness does he wipe once with clean cloth and ask for a hand treadle. The motion is different at once. Not silent. No honest loom is silent, but the burden in it has changed. The drag no longer sounds gummy. Now there is a clearer drywood note at one point farther back. A second issue, hidden before by the first. You feel a strange mix of relief and embarrassment. Relief, because the morning touch did not invent the trouble. Embarrassment, because it had quieted only the nearest complaint, while the deeper maintenance corner remained wrong. This, more than any scolding, teaches the danger of touch-up oiling. A drop can make a room think a machine is healthier than it is. The mechanic asks for the adjacent loom's ledger line. The foreman reads it, then asks for the loom beside that one. A pattern appears almost immediately. Same build, same service years, same hurried notes on damp days, same absence of full cleaning entries within the preferred interval. The issue is no longer confined to one black cord. It belongs to a family of habits. As afternoon lowers into the room, the investigation begins to widen, not as a panic. Panic would stain more cloth than dirt ever could. Instead, the foreman creates a new route for you. No more ordinary rounds for the moment. You are to check the neighboring machines, not with oil first, but with paper and ear. Listen through full repeats. Inspect beneath where possible. Touch nothing until residue is judged. This is, in its way, a kind of punishment, but it is also trust. A careless man would be removed from the work. You are being folded deeper into it. The first neighboring loom shows a lesser version of the same story. No audible drag yet, but beneath the lower guide, folded waste paper comes back with a greasy shadow and a glitter of lint too fine to see unless it catches light. The second has overfilled cups, each holding more oil than today's humidity asks for. On a dry day, that might have passed as caution carried too far. Here, in Kyoto's heavy air, it reads differently. The wood has already taken in the weather. The cords have softened a little. The silk itself sits with more weight in it than it did on a cold, clear morning. Extra oil in such weather does not make a loom freer. It makes the dust stay. You tilt one cup gently and see the meniscus tremble at the edge. The foreman watches that tiny surface movement as if it were a confession. He says nothing at first. He only asks for the wiping cloth kept with that loom's service tray. The cloth is brought. It has been folded and reused so many times that the original weave of it has become hard to read. Some corners are dark with old work. Some are merely tired. No part of it is truly clean. That is enough to connect one rule to another. The cups overfilled, the cloth too familiar, the quick touch-up done during active weaving. The skipped lift of old residue beneath. Not one dramatic failure, just a chain of small permissions. And each permission made the next one easier. The foreman does not scold the room. That would waste energy and make everyone defensive. Instead, he begins asking short questions in the ordinary tone used for inventory. When was this cloth last changed? Who filled these cups? which looms were wiped after yesterday's close? Who checked the underguides during the last wet spell? The answers come back unevenly. Some are precise, some are guesses, some belong to no single person at all. One weaver says he topped the cup because the loom sounded heavy in last week's rain. Another says he only used the cloth left on the tray. A helper admits he wiped visible oil but did not reach beneath the frame boards because the order had to continue. No one is lying exactly, but the workshop's memory has gone soft around the edges. That is what troubles the foreman most. A rule only protects cloth when someone can still remember why it exists. When memory fades, the rule becomes decoration. And decoration is not much use against lint and wood dust. The senior mechanic moves from loom to loom with the same patient economy he used at the black cord frame. He does not hunt for guilt, he hunts for pattern. At each machine he asks for nearly the same things. Paper first, then a hand treadle, then a look at the cups, the pivots, the cloth on the tray, the color and smell of what has gathered below. He uses his nose as much as his eyes. Fresh oil has one scent. Old oil mixed with damp silk dust has another, duller smell with a faint sourness that comes only after many days of weather and heat. You had not known that before. Now, standing near him, you begin to separate it too. The room is teaching your senses by force. That is often how workshops teach best. At the third neighboring loom, the problem is different again. The race is not dirty, the cup is not overfull. The cloth is recently changed, yet the lower pivot still sounds sticky on the downstroke. The mechanic kneels, touches the wood lightly, and asks whether oil was added this morning. The weaver says yes before dawn. You know that means one of the helpers, because this man arrived after the earliest round. The mechanic asks whether old oil was lifted first. The weaver does not know. A helper from the front row blushes without being addressed. He had seen a shine, assumed dryness, and touched fresh oil directly over yesterday's residue. Only a little, only enough to quiet a whisper. The whisper quieted, the stickiness deepened. There it is again. Not negligence in the grand sense, only the very ordinary habit of solving the visible thing in front of the hand. The foreman has the ledger brought closer. He begins adding a second kind of note beside the usual maintenance marks. Not merely touched, wiped, or cleaned. Now he writes words like cup high, cloth old, residue present, lift required, delay caused by order. The page grows denser. You can feel the workshop changing around that page. The ledger is no longer a record of isolated chores. It is becoming a map of habits. A map can be more troubling than a mistake. A mistake can be blamed and finished. A map suggests roads many people have been using. By mid-afternoon, the sound of the room has changed in a way that visitors would not notice. The total noise is almost the same. The number of moving looms has recovered somewhat as the less troubled frames resume. But the attention inside the sound is different. Weavers now complete full repeats before lifting a hand to call for you. Helpers glance beneath frames before reaching for bottles. Even the younger workers, who usually move from one small urgency to the next, are slower in the best way. The shed has remembered that speed can smear trouble instead of reducing it. Rain begins outside, softly at first, not a storm. Only the kind of steady KYOTO wetness that turns roof edges dark and lays a cooler smell over the lane. You hear it before you see it. Then someone slides a panel a little narrower, and the light in the room flattens into silver. Rainy weather would tempt an inexperienced oiler. The wood swells. The motion feels heavier. The looms speak in thicker voices. A person new to the job might think the cure is obvious. More oil for more resistance. But the old workshop rule goes the other way. On rainy days, use less. The reason stands all around you now. The moisture has already swollen fibers and softened surfaces. More oil would only gather what the weather has lifted. Dust clings faster in damp air. Lint settles instead of drifting away. A shining cup on a dry winter day is one thing. A shining cup in rain is a trap. The foreman uses the weather itself to reset the room. He tells the helpers to cap every bottle and bring them to the board. Not because oiling is forbidden, because quantity must be controlled at the source. Small amounts are poured into shallow caps and distributed only where the mechanic approves. The rest stays stoppered. This feels stern for a few minutes. Then it begins to feel sensible. A bottle in the hand invites another touch, then another. A cap with 2 drops in it invites thought. You stand by the board, warming one measure after another between your fingers before passing it on. The old first rule returns in the middle of this larger correction. Warm the oil by hand. Never pour it cold. It seems almost humble compared with ledgers and inspections, yet here it is again at the center of the work. Cold oil thickens. Thick oil sits where it lands. Sitting oil traps what the air gives it. In a room full of silk, wood, paper, and moving feet, the air gives plenty. The senior mechanic asks you to accompany him down the row nearest the wall. These looms are not the finest in the shed, but they were built by the same shop and serviced for years under the same habits. He says little as he works. That is useful. Silence makes you notice more. At one loom, he points to a dark line just beneath a bearing and asks what you see. You say, "Old oil." He nods, then asks what shape it is. You look again. Not a drip, not a smear. A shallow crescent with the denser edge on one side. That means movement has been carrying the residue unevenly. One face is loading harder than the other. Wear is beginning to favor a direction. Oil did not cause that, but oil made the sign visible. At another frame, he asks you to listen during 3 full repeats before bending at all. The first repeat sounds ordinary. The second reveals a dull catch on the return. The third does not repeat the same catch. You start to reach for paper. He stops you with one finger. "Not machine," he murmurs. "Foot." You watch the weaver more closely and see it. Her left treadle stroke becomes shallower only when she glances to the pattern notes. The noise belonged to hesitation in the body, not friction in the frame. Had you oiled that place, you would only have made the loom dirtier while teaching yourself the wrong lesson. This is what the earlier rule always meant, and now it feels less strict and more merciful. Wait for the second sound in the same place. If it belongs to the person, let the person settle. If it belongs to the machine will repeat itself. Machines are patient that way. People are not always. The mechanic has you clean one small guide completely while he watches. Paper first. Lift, do not scrub. Fold to a fresh edge. Lift again. Then ash on cloth, very little. Then a dry pass. Then one touch of warmed oil from the bamboo tip. Then wait. He makes you count the waiting in breaths instead of numbers. That changes the feel of it. Numbers create a target. Breaths create attention. By the 7th slow breath, the surface has lost its wet look. By the 9th, the cloth tells you no excess remains. Only then do you test by hand. The motion comes back smooth and plain without the syrup sound that over-oiled joints make. He gives no praise. He simply says, "Now you know the difference between feeding wood and coating it." That sentence is worth more than praise. It puts the whole day into one line. As the afternoon deepens, the foreman begins revising the route for every maintenance round. You can see him on a scrap of paper, drawing rows of looms with small marks beside them. The old route had favored speed and cloth priority, which made sense in busy weeks. Fine goods first, rear row first, touch only where needed. Move on. Now a second route overlays the first. Inspection before oil, paper before cloth in suspect corners. Cup level checked on damp days. Used cloths removed before the midday pause, not after. Black cord and formal obi looms approached from the left, as always, but now with a second pause to inspect hanging thread clearances before any touch. These are not grand reforms, they are tiny adjustments. That is why they will matter. Big dramatic changes rarely survive the next rush of orders. Small ones can settle into the body, and the body keeps workshops alive. The room does lose time. There is no pretending otherwise. One loom remains open longer than anyone would like. Another is stopped briefly for cup cleaning that would once have been postponed. A helper is sent to wash cloths immediately instead of waiting until evening. The The weaver from the black cord loom spends part of the hour assisting with winding, and part of it simply waiting beside his own frame, hands quiet, face unreadable. Lost production is a heavy thing in any workshop. It does not have to be spoken aloud to be felt. Yet the mood is not bitter. Not exactly. It is more like the mood in a house where someone has found rot beneath a floorboard. There is inconvenience. There is cost. But there is also relief that the weakness was found before it gave way under greater weight. You bring fresh paper to the black cord loom again after the bearing path has been properly lifted, wiped, and re-oiled. The mechanic has reset the collar. The guide has been seated true. The race has been checked with the back of the fingernail for roughness. Even the hanging paper pattern aid on the right side is retied a little higher to keep the space cleaner. The weaver returns. The foreman stands back. The pattern master, though still impatient with delay, now watches with more interest. "Run it," says the mechanic. The shuttle goes. Pass, beat, return. Pass, beat, return. The long pattern section comes. You can feel your own shoulders weighting ahead of the sound. But this time the burdened whisper does not arrive. Not on the first long run. Not on the second. The loom has not become miraculous. It still speaks as a loom should speak, with knocks and breathing wood and the soft hiss of silk under tension, but the gummy drag is absent. In its place there is a cleaner note, slightly brighter, almost lighter. The mechanic listens through 4 full repeats before nodding. The foreman writes a new line. Cleaned under frame, residue lifted, tested after measured touch, running plain. The order resumes. A few heads in the room lift, then lower again. That is all. No one celebrates. There is too much work left for celebration. But the steadiness that returns to the sound is a kind of quiet reward. And to you, standing with the bottle still closed in your hand, the lesson settles more deeply than any scolding could have forced. The strange rules were not strange because someone loved control. They were strange because each one had been shaped against a very specific kind of error. Warm the oil because cold thickness lies. Wait for the second sound because the body can mimic the machine. Approach from the safe side because cloth and pattern aids crowd one edge more than the other. Change the cloth sooner than seems necessary because dirt that cannot be seen can still travel. Lift yesterday before feeding today because old oil remembers every bit of dust it ever met. On a page, those rules would look fussy. In the room, they look merciful. They prevent the same expensive lesson from being paid for twice. The rain holds through the late afternoon. Humidity settles into the beams. Even your sleeves feel heavier. The smell of the room changes with it. Less dry wood now. More warm silk, lamp smoke, wet sandals near the entrance, and that faint metallic sweetness that comes when rain cools roof nails and gutters outside. The foreman orders braziers adjusted, not to heat the room greatly, but to keep the worst dampness from sitting in one place. A workshop does not fight weather directly. It nudges against it. Panels are shifted, cloths are moved, oil is reduced. Foot traffic near the finest threads is rerouted. The whole building behaves like a living thing, making itself comfortable enough to continue. A younger helper asks, under his breath, why less oil should help when everything feels heavier. The senior mechanic answers without impatience. Because heaviness is not always hunger, he says. Sometimes it is swelling. Sometimes it is dragged from the air itself. If you feed swelling as though it were dryness, you only give dirt a place to stick. The boy nods, as if he understands fully. Perhaps he does not yet, but he will remember the phrase. Workshops often teach in short sentences that ripen years later. You find yourself listening to the whole shed again, with fresher ears. Earlier, every odd sound had seemed like a call for intervention. Now, after the opened frames and the lifted residue, the room separates more clearly. You hear where a shuttle face has a tiny roughness. You hear where a treadle board knocks because a foot lands off center. You hear a harmless cup lid tapping with each beat. You hear, too, the muffled sticky mutter of one loom near the front. And this time, you do not reach for oil. You crouch, slide waste paper beneath the lower path, and draw it back dark. The problem answers itself. The foreman notices that choice. Again he says nothing. But his silence has warmed since noon. The difference is small and real. Toward the end of the work stretch, he has all used wiping cloths collected into 3 piles. Wash, scrap for rough wood only, discard. This sorting, which might once have been done hastily at day's close, now becomes part of the lesson. A cloth that has touched pale silk looms cannot automatically return to them tomorrow. A cloth with old resin in it may be useful on a gate hinge or wheelbarrow axle, but not here. A cloth that merely looks decent after a hard week is not the same as a cloth fit for figured work. The women at the washing corner know this already. You can tell by the way one of them lifts a rag to the light and rejects it before the foreman even speaks. Knowledge in a workshop does not always wear the title that belongs to it. Some of the strictest care lives in the hands of people who never enter the ledger. That, too, is part of the room's hidden structure. The black cord loom runs through another order segment without complaint. Its weaver, who had earlier given you only practical space, now speaks for the first time directly about the morning. He says the lower drag had been there in weather like this before. Not every day. Only when the longer pattern ran and his left foot settled into the deeper rhythm, he had thought it belonged to age. You ask why he did not report it sooner. He gives a small shrug. Because it still wove. Because there were deliveries waiting. Because a loom that still produced acceptable cloth was easy to forgive. This is the most ordinary reason in the world. And because it is ordinary, rules must stand where memory and convenience blur. A workshop made only of good intentions would fail by autumn. One made of habits has a chance. The foreman later adds a note to the route paper. Long repeat sounds to be reported, even if cloth remains clean. There, in one practical line, the day becomes future policy. Small things. Still, small things are what the whole job is built from. The rain begins to lift as the light thins toward evening. Not sunlight exactly, more a pale easing of the grey. The roof stops its steady whisper and returns to occasional drips. With the weather shift, a few looms lighten in their sound almost at once. That immediate change is another lesson. Not every drag belongs to wear. Not every heaviness belongs to dryness. Wood, silk, cord, and air are all speaking together. The loom oiler's trade is partly to know which voice is asking for help. That sort of knowing cannot be rushed. It grows from standing still long enough. The foreman sends you and the younger helper back to the loom's first check that afternoon to confirm cup levels after the weather break. At the second loom, the one with too much oil in the cups, you wick away the excess with fresh paper rather than cloth. The paper drinks quietly. It leaves less smear. The helper asks why not save the paper by turning it. You answer before thinking. Because lifted oil is no longer clean oil. The words come out in the mechanic's cadence, not your own. The helper nods. Now you have passed something along. That is how workshop memory survives. Not beautifully, not formally. Just in one person repeating what another learned by cost. At the wall row, you find that the guide you cleaned earlier has remained plain. No fresh dark line. No gummy sound. That steadiness is almost soothing. A properly maintained part often disappears back into the room. It no longer asks for attention. That is its reward. Quiet usefulness. You begin to understand that your own best work as an oiler may look like absence. No drama. No heroics. Only looms that continue without incident. Silk that leaves unstained. And workers who barely have reason to think about the hand that passed there before dawn. For some jobs, that would feel invisible in a bitter way. Here, it feels right. The foreman calls a brief halt at one point, not for all looms, only for the row nearest the center lane. He wants each oiler's station reset before evening carries fatigue into carelessness. Bottles wiped, stoppers checked, caps counted, bamboo tips sorted by fine and rough use. Clean paper stacked separately from scrap, warm oil cloths not to be left folded wet overnight. Even this small housekeeping has the tone of correction now, because disorder in tools invites disorder in judgment. An uncapped bottle can be knocked, A mixed stack of cloths can send old grime to fresh silk. A bamboo tip used on rough underframe residue should not next touch a race beside figured work. A brush set down in the wrong tray can carry yesterday's underframe dirt into tomorrow's finest work, and no one sees the mistake until the silk catches the light. So the sorting takes time. You stand at the board with the younger helper and the washing woman from the corner, and each object is judged by what it has touched. The fine bamboo slivers go to one side. The rough ones, dark at the tip from contact below the frame, go to another. Cloths that have only held warmed oil and clean race wiping are folded separately. Cloths that have entered the underboards are marked for harsher use, or for washing if the weave of them is still worth saving. Even the bottlenecks are inspected. A ring of old oil around a stopper means dust tomorrow. A loose stopper means a spill tonight. And a spill in a room lined with wood, paper, and silk is never just a spill. It is smell, stain, waste, and suspicion, all at once. The foreman checks these things with the same face he used for the black cord loom. That is part of what makes his authority settle into the room. He does not reserve seriousness only for costly cloth. He gives it also to the little acts that protect costly cloth from ever being threatened. You begin to see that the strange rules were never meant to stand alone. They are linked. Warm the oil, and you prevent thickness. Use a clean cloth, and you prevent transfer. Lift old residue first, and you prevent paste. Approach from the safe side, and you prevent accidental contact. Reduce oil in rain, and you prevent lint from settling into every wet shine. Each rule seems small until you watch what happens when several are loosened at once. Then the whole workshop begins to sound heavier. The late work stretch is often the most dangerous, not because machines fail then, but because people become familiar with the day. Once the black cord loom is running again, there is a temptation in everyone to feel that the lesson has already been learned. The room wants to relax. Shoulders lower, hands move more automatically. Voices soften in that tired late afternoon way. This is exactly when habits show their true shape. A careful room stays careful when the urgency has passed. A careless room becomes bold the moment relief enters. The foreman knows this, so he begins making quiet rounds of observation, not only of the looms but of the people who serve them. He watches how bottles are recapped. He watches whether paper is folded to a clean edge before the next lift. He watches whether cloth corners are tested against the thumb before touching wood. He says very little. That little is enough. At one loom near the entrance, a helper reaches for the oil cap before checking the cup level. The foreman places 2 fingers on the tray and says, "First, look." The helper stops, checks, and discovers the cup is still high from an earlier touch. No oil is needed. The boy bows slightly, embarrassed, though not deeply. This sort of correction is not meant to humiliate. It is meant to interrupt a hand that has started moving ahead of thought. You remember doing the same thing in your first months. A shine looked dry. A squeak sounded mechanical. A used cloth still felt usable. Nothing in the room announces the difference between enough and too much. The only teacher is consequence. By now the consequence has become visible enough that even the younger workers move with more attention. The rain leaves the lane outside smelling of packed earth and wet stone. A cool draft comes under the sliding door, bringing with it the faint odor of horse, straw sandal rope, and the river somewhere beyond the district. Inside, the braziers keep the deepest damp from settling in the floorboards. Their heat is low and patient, just enough to hold the air in balance. The silk responds to this nearly as much as the people do. Thread that seemed reluctant an hour earlier begins to run with less complaint. The black cord loom's tone remains plain and even. That steadiness makes the earlier morning touch feel different in memory, not innocent. Not entirely mistaken, but incomplete. You had answered the sound that presented itself. The workshop by afternoon has answered the condition behind it. Those are not the same thing. That may be the largest lesson of the day. A loom oiler is not there only to quiet friction. You are there to judge what kind of friction this is, where it belongs, and whether oil is truly the right answer. Sometimes the proper answer is paper. sometimes ash, sometimes waiting, sometimes a note in the ledger, and a decision that costs half a day. That is a harder trade than it appears from the doorway. Most people, if they think of such work at all, imagine a bottle and a quick hand. They do not imagine listening through pattern repeats. They do not imagine weather entering the judgment. They do not imagine a cloth being changed while it still appears clean. They do not imagine that the difference between a good workshop and a merely busy one may lie in a rule as plain as not trusting yesterday's rag. Toward the far wall, one of the senior weavers asks if you will check his treadle board after the next repeat. His voice has changed since morning. It no longer carries the slight distance workers often keep from maintenance hands. Now it carries consultation. That, more than anything written in the ledger, tells you the room has accepted what today revealed. You wait where he asked, listening. The board gives a short, dry note on the upstroke. Not loud, not urgent, but cleanly mechanical, repeating in the same point. You kneel, use fresh paper first, find no lifted residue, and then take the smallest touch of warmed oil on the cloth. One pass, wait, test. The note disappears, and nothing darkens around it. A tiny repair. Correctly judged, it should not feel like redemption, and yet it does. Not because anyone praises you, because the process itself has become clearer in your hands. The senior weaver nods and returns to his work with no further comment. That nod warms more than a brazier. Trust from workers who live all day at the loom is hard won. They do not care whether a maintenance rule sounds elegant. They care whether the cloth leaves the frame clean. They care whether their rhythm is interrupted for good reason. They care whether the man with the bottle knows the difference between helping and meddling. The younger helper beside you is beginning to hear the room too. At one point he pauses and says that the front row sounds thicker than the back. The word is imprecise, but his ear is not wrong. The front row, nearer the entrance and the drafts, has taken more damp into its lower wood, while the back row near the interior warmth is running drier and lighter. You tell him so. He asks if that means the front row needs more oil. You tell him not yet. Thickness in sound is not hunger by itself. He repeats that phrase under his breath, as if he is tying it into memory. This is how the workshop's odd wisdom survives. Not through speeches, through repeated short sayings attached to very ordinary moments. By the time the afternoon leans toward evening, the foreman's scrap route paper has become spotted with notes and thumb marks. He folds it once, unfolds it, adds another line and folds it again. Eventually he copies the clearest changes into the ledger margin where they will not be mistaken for temporary convenience. That is when you know the day has altered more than a few looms. A temporary fix stays on scraps. A lasting rule enters the book. He writes in the compact hand that wastes no motion. Rain days, cups lower, cloths exchanged before second round if oiled twice. Underframe lift not deferred beyond marked interval. Long repeat drag to be observed through full pattern before touch. These are not poetic sentences. Still, there is a kind of beauty in them. They are memory compressed into enough words to survive the next busy month. You wonder how many such lines have accumulated in KYOTO workshops over generations. A visitor might call them fussy, a worker would call them paid for. Every rule began, once, as somebody's costly afternoon. The pattern master who cares most about cloth and timing, not maintenance philosophy, eventually comes to stand beside the foreman with his thin stick tucked under one arm. He reads the added lines in silence. Then he says that if long repeat drags are to be reported earlier, he wants the callers trained to note whether the sound aligns with harness change or shuttle return. That is a practical refinement, and it tells you something quiet about him. He is not offended that the maintenance problem delayed his work. He is already shaping how pattern knowledge can help prevent the next delay. In a good room, each trade leans toward the others when needed. The foreman nods. A small agreement is made there without ceremony. From tomorrow onward, pattern corrections and maintenance listening will overlap more clearly. When a repeated drag appears, the The caller will note whether it belongs above or below. A little more information, a little less guessing. That, too, is how a workshop becomes steadier, not by grand inventions, by small trades of attention between people who already know their own corner well. The black cord loom completes enough cloth before evening to soften, though not erase, the day's loss. The resumed output cannot replace the hours already gone. Still, every clean repeat feels like the room paying itself back in patient installments. The weaver works without flourish. You can tell he is listening harder than before. Every worker near that loom is listening harder. Not nervously now, just with the sharpened ear that comes after trouble has finally explained itself. That kind of listening is tiring. It is also strangely satisfying. The room feels more honest. A problem hidden in habit is more exhausting than a problem openly handled. Once the underframe has been lifted and the rule made plain again, everyone breathes more easily, even while working. Near the washing corner, the woman sorting cloths tells you that the finest wiping rags once came from worn underlayers of summer kimono lining. She says this while wringing one carefully, almost absently, as if mentioning weather. The cloth was soft, tightly woven, and gave little lint of its own. Old workshop women knew exactly which family fabrics could be cut down for loom care and which should never enter the shed because their dyes bled or their fibers roughened when heated. You had never thought much about where the best maintenance cloth began. Now even that feels part of the same world of hidden rules. An oiler's skill depends partly on women in another corner of the building choosing, washing, and discarding rags with judgment. So much of the room's order rests in places the ledger barely names. As evening work continues, you pass the stacked finished bolts awaiting inspection. Some are wrapped, some are still exposed along one edge. The pale silk catches the low light with a quiet glow that almost seems to come from within. Looking at it, after spending the day under frames and inside oily collars, is a useful correction. This is what all the rules serve. Not the bottle, not the foreman's temper, not the pride of being meticulous for its own sake. They serve this clean surface, this costly and delicate cloth that remembers every speck, every drag, every dark touch. A loom oiler does not make silk. Yet in a way, you guard the conditions under which silk may emerge unstained. That is more honorable than the title sounds. The workshop's evening meal break is shorter than midday. Some only drink tea. Some chew cold rice left from noon. The foreman does not reopen the whole matter in front of everyone. He has no need. The room has already felt the lesson through its hands. Instead, he sits with the ledger and asks you, quietly, to read back the sequence of the black cord loom from memory, not to test whether you are afraid, to test whether you can now tell the story in the right order. So you do. Soft drag during long repeat. Observed through full cycle. Left side approach. Fine bamboo touch after repeated sound. Lint crescent noted below race. Cloth later judged overused for second oil contact. Midday entry made. Repeat tested. Loom stopped. Underframe opened. Residue found and lifted. Measured re-oiling. Sound cleared. He listens without expression. Then he asks what should have happened differently before the touch. You answer at once now. The cloth should have been exchanged sooner, and the possibility of old residue beneath should have been judged before assuming a surface dryness. He nods. Then he asks what should not have happened differently. This takes a moment. Then you say that the drag still had to be reported. It still had to be heard through a full repeat, and it still had to be approached from the left side if touched at all. Again he nods. That matters. A worker who learns from an error by discarding every instinct becomes timid and useless. A worker who learns by separating the sound judgment from the incomplete judgment becomes better. The foreman is shaping that distinction in you. The mechanic, listening from a little distance, adds that if a room reacts to one mistake by making everyone afraid to touch anything, maintenance will simply drift into neglect again. The answer is not fear. It is sequence. Judge second, apply third, test fourth, record after, short words, plain order. You say them back once in your mind, because they feel like something you will carry for years. The tea is thin and hot. It tastes faintly of smoke from the brazier water kettle. Someone in the lane outside is selling roasted sweet potato. For a few breaths, the smell reaches under the door, warm and earthy, and the whole room seems to soften around it. This, too, belongs to the day, the quiet human details no ledger keeps. A helper rubbing his tired ankle before standing again. A weaver folding a lunchcloth so precisely you can tell he was taught by someone strict and loving. The pattern master warming his fingers over the brazier for a count of 3 breaths, then going back to paper and thread. The mechanic wiping the scraper on the same part of his sleeve he has probably used for years. Small things. But workshops are made of small things. The rules work because they fit into that scale. By the last work stretch before full evening, the room has found a steadier pulse than it had even in the morning. Not faster, only cleaner. There are fewer unnecessary interruptions, fewer speculative touches, more listening before action, more paper used where cloth would once have gone immediately. You begin your final route with fresh rags, measured caps, and a much lighter hand. Now you are not trying to prove care. You are simply moving inside it. At the loom nearest the rear post, a cup has dropped slightly below the level preferred for the night's final runs. You lift yesterday's trace with a folded paper edge first. Only then do you add one warmed drop to the cap, touch the bearing, wait, and wipe. It is almost ceremonial, except ceremony usually serves symbolism. This serves wood. Still, there is comfort in the sequence. A body at ease with good order can become calm inside repetition. That may be why the old workers defend these rules so stubbornly. They are not only protections against damage, they are a way of moving through the day without scattering your mind. At another loom, a weaver apologizes for calling you over to what turns out to be a thread handling issue, not a dry joint. You tell him there is no harm in asking when the sound is uncertain. The harm comes in pretending certainty too soon. He smiles at that, just briefly. Then he adjusts his left hand, changes how he guides the shuttle exit, and the sound disappears. Again, the machine had been accused of what the body was doing. Again, waiting prevented unnecessary oil. By this point, the rule about listening between the clatter no longer sounds strange at all. It feels obvious. But only because the whole day has been spent proving why it had to be said out loud. Common sense is often nothing more than hard experience after enough people have survived it. The rain-scrubbed evening light fades from the upper windows. Lamps are trimmed. The room takes on warmer tones. Gold on wood, soft cream along thread, dark hollows under the frames. And in that lamplight, traces of oil become more dangerous to judgment because they look richer, deeper, more present than they truly are. A novice might see every shining point and think more wiping is needed, or worse, might find the glow attractive and mistake that for proper lubrication. But you know now that the best maintained surfaces do not announce themselves much at all. They look plain, almost dry. Only the motion tells the truth. The foreman, perhaps seeing the same shift in light, orders the last checks done by touch and sound more than by eye. No one objects. Eyes can be charmed by evening. Hands are harder to deceive. A little after this, one final small trouble appears, and it is useful because it is so ordinary. The younger helper, trying to do well, brings you a cloth he believes is still fit for the fine row. It has been washed, dried, folded, and stored properly. At a glance, it seems good. But when you rub it between thumb and forefinger, the surface catches almost imperceptibly, too rough. The fibers have hardened from repeated washing and earlier contact with resin-rich wood. He asks how you can tell. You tell him to close his eyes and feel the difference between that cloth and the one in your other hand. He does. After a few breaths, he nods. The rougher cloth would not scrape wood visibly, yet on delicate, thread-adjacent surfaces, it could lift lint or leave its own. That is enough to move it from one pile to another. No drama, only classification. A strange amount of workshop wisdom turns out to be sorting. Not all tools belong everywhere. Not all fixes belong in every season. Not all sounds belong to friction. Not all cloths are simply cloths. What looks fussy from outside is often just the long labor of putting each thing in its proper place. As the final orders move through the looms, the foreman calls you once more to the ledger. This time there is no tension around it, only work. He wants the black cord entry expanded slightly before the ink fully settles in memory. He dictates the added line slowly enough that you can write it yourself. Observed lint darkening below, race after touch, residue beneath frame later found compacted. Cause judged cumulative, not from single application alone. That line matters, not because it absolves you, because it prevents the next reader from misunderstanding the sequence. A ledger line too short can become a false lesson. Someone months later might see only darkened lint after touch and conclude that no fine intervention should ever be attempted during weaving. That would be the wrong lesson. The right lesson is narrower and more useful. Fine intervention without clean sequence invites hidden trouble. The foreman understands this. He protects the future by being exact in a few more words. Then he adds one final note in his own hand. Cloth exchange rule to be repeated to all helpers. No one speaks while he writes it. There is no need. That sentence is as close to formal judgment as the day requires. You feel its weight. It does not crush, it settles. A workshop that records an error cleanly is kinder than one that turns error into rumor. Rumor teaches almost nothing. A plain note teaches the right person every time the page is opened. The room now begins to shorten itself toward night. Not by stopping all at once, by completing what is already on the loom and declining what cannot be finished carefully before dark. This, too, is a discipline. There are always a few more passes that could be forced from a day. A few more touch-ups, a few more corrections, spoken after tiredness has already thinned everyone's judgment. But good workshops know when continuation becomes waste. So the foreman begins to close the day in layers, the same way a careful person closes shutters before rain fully arrives. First, the newest work is allowed to finish its present repeat. Then the more delicate looms are brought to stillness before the heavier plain weave frames. Then the tools begin returning to their proper places, one by one, while the room is still warm enough for the hands to notice what each tool has become through the day. You make your last slow walk with the bottle, though by now there is almost nothing left to give. That is part of the evening rule too. A bottle should not be emptied for the sake of feeling useful. If the route has been judged well, the final round is mostly observation. You stop beside the black cord loom again. It is running its last measured section before rest. The weaver's shoulders are lower now. Not loose exactly, but no longer braced against the memory of that dragging sound. He works through the final pattern return with the calm of someone who has accepted the lost hours and reclaimed what can still be saved from them. The loom's voice stays plain, not beautiful, not musical, just correct. And in a workshop, correctness can be a very deep comfort. When the final shuttle of that run passes through and returns, the weaver lets the motion settle on its own. No abrupt stopping, no proud flourish. His foot eases off the treadle. His hands gather the working thread clear. The hanging pattern aid is checked once, then tied out of risk. Only after all that does he rise. You kneel where you knelt in the morning. The race is dry to the eye. The little lint crescent that had spoken so loudly at noon is gone now, because it was not rubbed away for appearances. It disappeared only after the true residue beneath was removed and the running surface stopped feeding it. That distinction matters. A room full of tired people may be tempted by neat surfaces, but neatness is not the same as correction. The foreman wants correction, even now, especially now. At the neighboring looms, the same end-of-day order unfolds. Cups are checked before being left overnight, not topped off, not indulged. Checked. If a cup holds enough for morning start after the night's temperature shift, it is left alone. If it holds too much, the excess is lifted with paper. The rule had once seemed mean to the younger helpers. Why deny a loom the comfort of fullness before the cold night? Now the reason feels obvious. A full cup left to weather can gather dust by dawn, thicken at the lip, and encourage a sleepy hand to assume the machine is ready when what it really needs is cleaning. The younger helper beside you asks if the route will stay changed now. You tell him probably yes, though perhaps not in exactly today's shape. A workshop rarely keeps a day's lesson unchanged. It trims it, fits it to practice. The cloth exchange rule will remain firm. The underframe intervals will shorten for a while. Rain day measures may become stricter. Then, after some months of steadier work, a few edges may soften again. That is not failure. That is how living systems move. The important thing is that the reason beneath the rule remains awake. He thinks about this while holding a stack of folded paper. Then he says the rules used to sound as if they came from old men who feared waste. Now they sound as if they came from old men who had already seen waste. You nod. That is the difference between a rule made from authority and a rule made from memory. One demands obedience. The other quietly offers rescue. The washing corner grows busier as the room itself grows quieter. Cloths are counted there, not just dropped. The woman in charge does not trust piles. She trusts categories. Fine cloths that touched only upper surfaces. Heavier cloths that entered under boards. Scrap pieces too loaded with old oil to wash back into useful life. A few rag lengths still soft enough for next day's bottlenecks. This sorting has its own rhythm. Shake, look, rub between fingers, smell, decide. It is not grand work, but like yours, it protects silk from stains nobody notices being prevented. You carry over the cloth from the black cord round, not the one used earlier in error. That one has already been marked and set aside for rough service only. This is the later, better cloth used after the underframe was cleaned and the measured touch was applied. The washing woman rubs it once against her thumb, lifts it to the lamp, and says it may survive one more fine washing. Then she adds, almost casually, that people ruin more silk with proud thrift than with plain carelessness. That line belongs in the same family as the mechanic's sayings. You feel it settle beside them. Proud thrift. That is exactly what happens when someone reuses a cloth because it does not look too dirty. The hand enjoys saving. The eye approves. The ledger pays later. By the entrance, sandals are being set in order for departure. The damp from the rain has cooled. The lane beyond the door has the dark, washed smell of wood gutters and stone. From somewhere farther off comes the faint thump of a night mallet on cloth, or perhaps rice being pounded in a courtyard. KYOTO in the evening carries many small labor sounds if you stand still enough to hear them. Inside the shed, the last active looms are the plainest ones. That often happens at day's end. Fine work stops sooner because fatigue is expensive there. Plainer work can be carried a little farther. Still, even those frames are not allowed to run into clumsy darkness. The foreman walks the center lane once more and says, "No new starts." That sentence, simple as it is, closes the room more firmly than any bell. No new starts means no one pretends there is time for one more correction, one more trial, one more little useful act that can be half finished and forgotten by dawn. A task that cannot be completed in clean sequence tonight belongs to tomorrow. The mechanic approves of this without comment. He is already under the side bench, wrapping his scraper in paper before laying it down. Tools put away cleanly tell the truth about what kind of day has been had. A tool returned sticky is a promise of confusion in the morning. A tool wiped, sorted, and nested where it belongs allows tomorrow to begin in a straight line. You stop at the maintenance board and open the tray one last time. The narrow scraper is smooth and dark from use. It is wiped with cloth, then with dry paper, then laid in its shallow groove. The bamboo slivers are counted by touch. Fine tips together, rough-used tips apart. One has begun to fray near the wrapping. That one is cut shorter and reassigned to underframe duty. Nothing is romantic here. A tool is not cherished sentimentally. It is respected by being used in the right place until its nature changes, then placed in a lower-risk role. The bottle itself is almost warm from having lived in your hands so much of the day. You hold it up to the lamp. The oil inside is lower than this morning, but not by much. That pleases you more than it would have before. A new oiler often thinks a busy day should leave the bottle nearly empty. An older one learns that a well-run day may consume very little. The bottleneck is wiped with a fresh square. The stopper is checked for a clean fit. Then the bottle is wrapped in a scrap of cloth, not for decoration, but to keep dust from settling at the lip overnight. The foreman sees you do it. Again, there is no spoken praise. There does not need to be. The room has moved beyond needing every lesson named aloud. By now, some of it is entering the body. At the ledger board, the foreman remains seated longer than anyone else. Even when the room is half empty, he is still writing, not endlessly, just carefully. The final pages for the day are receiving the kind of notes that keep trouble from becoming legend. A legend grows vague and self-important. A note stays useful. You come to stand at a respectful distance until he gestures you closer. He asks for the final cup levels from the wall row. You recite them in order. First row nearest screens. All moderate, no excess. Middle wall pair, one reduced by paper, one left untouched. Rear wall loom, lower guide cleaned and tested plain. The black cord loom, under frame lifted, race clear, cup set below ordinary dry day mark due to lingering damp. He writes each thing down with fewer words than you used, and better ones. That is a skill too. Noticing is one trade. Compressing what was noticed into memory that others can use is another. He turns back 3 pages, then 4. You see him comparing the day's record with older maintenance lines. The black cord loom has been mentioned before, though never with enough insistence to force a stop. Minor drag in wet spell, slight heaviness low run, touched left race, no visible effect. The language of delay is always mild. That is how machines get neglected in decent places. No one writes, "This loom is being slowly buried under old habit." They write, "Slight heaviness, minor drag, will review later." Later grows fat and comfortable if nobody interrupts it. Today interrupted it. Costly, yes. Still useful. The foreman says, quietly, that tomorrow the rear row will open late. Not by much. Only long enough for a proper underframe check on the looms built in the same style. That means the day's lesson has already become tomorrow's schedule. You ask whether that will anger the buyer waiting on the OB order. He shrugs once. Better a short delay than a hidden fault traveling into cloth for a week. That answer is not dramatic. It is simply the sort of arithmetic workshops survive by. A little honesty today saves larger apology later. He adds that buyers complain loudly about delay, and even more loudly about visible marks. A foreman learns which kind of noise is cheaper. The pattern master comes over, hands clasped behind his back. His day's authority thins a little in the evening when the counting is done and the cloth is off tension. He asks whether the route paper has been copied. The foreman says, partly. The pattern master suggests a mark beside long repeat observations, something separate from ordinary noise notes. He wants a way to tell at a glance whether a sound belongs to pattern rhythm or machine persistence. The foreman considers. Then he draws a small sign in the margin and says they will try it for a month. That is how systems grow in good rooms. Not by proclamation, by trial in the ledger. A mark adopted for 1 month can become habit for 10 years, if it proves itself quietly enough. You watch them agree in 3 sentences over a page stained slightly at one corner with old ink. No one outside the shed would think such a moment mattered. But this is where the workshop teaches its future self. The others begin drifting out. Their good nights are small. Some bow to the foreman, some only incline the head toward the room itself. A shed that has held your body all day deserves acknowledgement on the way out. The weaver from the black cord loom lingers to run one dry finger along the beam before he leaves, not checking, just feeling. Then he nods to you once. No more than that. Yet that nod contains the whole day reduced to something workable. Not forgiveness, not gratitude exactly, recognition. You helped uncover what his loom had been enduring. You also delayed him. Both are true. A nod is the right shape for a truth like that. Now the remaining sounds grow larger because there are fewer of them. The rinse of cloth in a bucket, a brush being tapped clean on the tray edge, the soft scratch of the foreman's sleeve as he turns a page. The distant lane, quieter now, with evening sandals and an occasional cart, and beneath everything the wooden cooling of the looms themselves. A loom at rest does not become silent all at once. The tensions ease in it, fibers settle, a hanging cord turns almost imperceptibly. A beam gives back the day's heat. If you stay late enough, you can hear a workshop becoming furniture again. You are asked to help with the final wipe of the black cord loom, not a cleaning for repair now, a closing wipe. Upper surfaces only. Race checked. Left side first, as always. Paper pattern aid shielded by hand while dust is lifted from nearby wood. No oil added. The day's last lesson would be spoiled by some sentimental final touch. A loom that has been corrected should be allowed to rest in its correction. Too much fuss after repair is just another kind of meddling. You wipe the beam with a cloth that is clean enough for pale work. The wood carries the smell of warm resin and a little silk dust. Underneath, fainter now, there is still the mineral dullness of old residue recently disturbed from below. That scent will fade after a few more days of proper running. For tonight, it remains a quiet reminder that beneath every smooth surface there may be a history of compromises. The mechanic asks you to bring the shallow tin cap. You wonder if some last measured drop is required after all. Instead, he uses the cap as a cover over the bottle mouth while he tests the fit of the stopper. He says if the bottle cools too fast overnight, the neck will gather thickness at the lip by morning. Cap first, then cloth, then storage box. Even here, with the room nearly done, there is another small rule. It had never seemed worth mentioning. Now it does, because all the odd little survivals of a workshop turn out to belong to one long chain of not making tomorrow harder than it needs to be. The younger helper carries the scrap papers to the brazier room for disposal. Not all of them are burned. Some, with only light oil traces, may still be used to start kitchen fire in the service corner. The more loaded ones are separated. Even waste is sorted by what it has touched. That, too, would seem fussy to an outsider, but a paper thick with old oil and lint can smoke badly, smell wrong, and blacken walls where food is prepared. The same mind that protects silk often ends up protecting everything else nearby. Good habits spread sideways. You go with him and notice how the service room smells different from the shed. Rice steam lingering in wood, ash cooler here, iron kettle, pickle brine. The ordinary human side of the workshop, which runs beside the looms and makes their patience possible. A loom oiler's life depends on these other corners more than the title suggests. Warm water for cloth washing, clean storage for rags, ash sifted fine, rice eaten before hands grow foolish. A role that looks solitary from the outside is always braided into many other forms of care. When you return, the foreman has nearly finished with the ledger. He has added the lost afternoon output beside the black cord entry, not in large, accusing strokes, only as fact. So many lengths delayed, so much pattern time shifted. Then, in the margin, smaller than the rest, he writes that the loom now runs cleaner than prior week notes suggest. That is not praise. It is balance. A good ledger does not flatter, but it also does not preserve blame without outcome. The loss is recorded, the improvement is recorded. Future judgment may consider both. He sands the fresh ink lightly. The little shower of fine grit catches lamplight and then is tipped away. For a moment you watch the page before he closes it. It contains the whole day in compressed form. Morning route, observed drag, touch made, lint noted, cloth judged overused, loom opened, residue lifted, adjacent checks widened, rain measures adjusted, evening route revised. So much labor reduced to signs and brief phrases. And yet, because you lived it, the page seems crowded with the feel of kneeling wood, damp air, old lint peeling free, and the odd shame of realizing a rule had more wisdom in it than you first allowed. The foreman closes the book at last, but not with finality. He tucks a scrap marker where tomorrow's delayed rear row inspection must begin That means the matter is sleeping, not ending. A workshop's memory rarely ends in one day, it curls into the next. He tells you to leave the black cord loom service tray separate from the others. Fresh cloth only. New paper stack. One fine bamboo tip wrapped tonight, not in the morning, so no sleepy hand chooses a rough one by mistake. You prepare it carefully. The bamboo shaving is selected from the box. Not the thinnest, because that bends too readily under pressure. Not the thickest, because that tempts a heavier touch. A middle one, straight-grained, with a tip that can be pared smooth by thumbnail. You wrap it with the softest available scrap and tie it with thread. Then you place it alone on the tray. Such a tiny object. Still, tomorrow's first decision may depend on it. That is how much responsibility can gather around very little weight. The mechanic watches your wrapping and says the foreman was harsher with cloth rules this year than in earlier seasons. You ask why. He says the district had several bad runs of pale silk, marked by invisible transfer that only emerged after folding and delivery. Not in this shed alone, across more than one house. The weather had been wet, orders were high, helpers reused cloths too long. No one thought the marks belonged to them at first. Buyers blamed dye handling. Thread suppliers blamed winding rooms. Only later did some workshops realize the common feature was maintenance cloth carrying a film too fine to catch under ordinary light. That is how a rule becomes weird. By the time it reaches the newest workers, the original disaster has faded. Only the strict instruction survives. Change the cloth after the second oil touch. Use less in rain. Do not trust a clean-looking rag. To ears that never saw the marked silk, it sounds excessive. To those who live the returns and complaints, it sounds mercifully simple. You ask whether the foreman was in one of those houses. The mechanic says yes, long before he came here. A shipment of pale-figured sash fabric came back with intermittent shadowing near the selvage. Not every piece. Only enough to humiliate everyone involved. They spent days blaming looms, then thread, then dyers, before an older woman in the washing corner held up a maintenance cloth and said the answer was probably already in their hands. After that, the rule became hard as winter rice. The mechanic smiles very slightly when he says this, not because the memory is funny, because workshops sometimes need one humiliating truth before they agree to a wise inconvenience. That story changes your sense of the foreman's sternness. He is not worshipping order for its own sake. He is remembering a return nobody wants repeated. The room is almost empty now. Only you, the foreman, the mechanic, the washing woman, and one late helper remain. The lamps make wider pools because there are fewer bodies to interrupt them. Shadows deepen under the beams. The silk wrapped on resting looms catches less light and seems to retreat into itself. You hear a temple bell somewhere beyond the district. Not close, not loud, just enough to place the hour in your bones. The foreman stands and stretches one shoulder with the smallest wince. Even he is tired. Authority does not spare the back. He checks the shutters himself tonight, perhaps because the rain changed the wood's fit. One panel sticks at the lower rail. He does not kick it. He lifts, then slides. That, too, is a kind of lesson. A person who manages a loom room by force tends to manage wood badly. Everything here answers better to pressure placed in the right direction. Before leaving, he comes to the black cord loom one last time. He runs 2 fingers along the left upright, stopping at the black inspection cord. Then he unties it. That gesture is so quiet you almost miss its meaning. You see the loom differently once the cord is gone. Not safer, exactly, and not ordinary again, but return to the common discipline of the room. Its trouble has been named, opened, and worked through. Now it must simply behave well enough, day after day, to let the memory settle into habit. The foreman coils the black cord once around his fingers and places it in the tray beside the ledger. Not thrown aside, not displayed. Just stored with the other things that may be needed again. That feels right. A rule in a KYOTO shed is rarely abolished. It is only put back on the shelf until another season, Another order, another damp week asks for it. The washing woman blows out one lamp near the corner first. The room grows deeper in tone at once. Wood darkens. Silk dulls. The little metal edges on cups and pins stop catching light so eagerly. With less brightness, the looms become larger and quieter. They seem less like devices now and more like pieces of the building itself, as if they had grown from the floorboards and would remain there long after any one worker had gone home. You begin the last sorting at the maintenance board. The papers used for lifting old residue are stacked by weight of use. The clean ash bowl is covered. The rough-use cloths are tied separately. One cap still has the thinnest amber smear at its lip, and you wipe it until your thumb no longer feels tack beneath the cloth. This is the sort of work that would bore an impatient person immediately. But in this room, after a day like this, it feels almost settling. Every object returns to the state in which tomorrow can trust it. That is all. And that is enough. The mechanic checks the side bench where pins and pegs had been laid out during the underframe work. He counts by sight, then by touch. He knows their shapes so well that his fingers can tell if one belongs to another loom's repair kit. A misplaced peg is a small thing. Still, a small thing can send someone searching in the dark before dawn, and that searching can lead to haste, and haste can lead to the same kind of error the day has spent correcting. So he takes time. Workshops that last a long while are often just places where someone took time one step earlier than seemed necessary. The foreman folds the route scrap one more time and tucks it inside the ledger cover. Tomorrow's delayed opening for the rear row is no longer a possibility. It is part of the day that has not yet arrived. You can already feel it waiting. Those looms will be checked beneath before the first weaving begins. Paper first, then ear, then cap, then cloth only if the sequence deserves it. A whole morning altered because one faint drag finally met the right kind of attention. As you move down the center lane, the floor carries a thin film of the day's dust under your soles. Not dirt enough to see easily, just the ordinary mixture of silk fluff, ash traces, damp grit from sandals, and the powdery wear of old wood. The smell of the room has softened, too. With the work stopped, the sharper note of warmed motion is fading. What remains is gentler. Oil closed in bottles, silk resting, rain-damp air at the seams of the shutters, a little tea in cooling cups. The faint mineral memory from the underframe cleaning. A working room has one smell while it labors, and another while it settles. You only notice the second if you stay long enough. The younger helper lingers by the door, reluctant to leave before the final habits are complete. That is a good sign. A boy who learns that the day ends only when tools are honest is a boy who may become useful. He asks whether all houses in Nishijin keep ledgers this exacting. The mechanic gives a short breath that is almost a laugh. No, he says. But all houses that survive trouble try to remember in some form. Some use ledgers, some use wall slips. Some trust one old worker's mind until that worker dies and takes half the rules with him. That last kind often suffers most, because memory kept in one body cannot be handed cleanly to the next. You hear that and think of the black cord. How many marks like that existed because some workshop had once lost money, sleep, and dignity to a preventable stain? How many bottle habits came from one cold morning when thick oil would not spread? How many cloth rules came from invisible transfer discovered only after a buyer unfolded silk days later under another light? The strange rules were never random. They were compressed stories. Most of the stories had simply been shortened into commands. The mechanic lifts the tray with the cleaned tools and sets it in the storage cabinet near the wall. Before sliding the panel shut, he pauses and removes one thing again, the wrapped fine bamboo tip you prepared for the black cord loom. He places it alone on the separate service tray. Then he nods once, more to himself than to you. Prepared tools change the first minutes of the morning, and the first minutes of the morning often decide whether the rest of the day will be clean or corrective. That is something else you have learned here. The earliest habits matter most in a room not yet fully awake. Cold hands, Dim light. Workers arriving in staggered quiet. A bottle opened too soon. A cloth trusted too long. A shortcut taken because no one is looking yet. This is where many future troubles are planted. So tomorrow's first touch is being protected tonight. It is a modest kind of foresight, very much in the style of this place. The foreman finally wraps the ledger in its cloth cover. That, more than any spoken word, means the room is nearly released. Still, he does not leave at once. He walks the back row slowly, stopping at the neighboring looms that will open late in the morning. He touches no oil cups. He does not inspect dramatically. He only places a finger beneath each lower guide, then wipes that finger on a scrap to judge what remains there unseen. At one loom the scrap comes back nearly clean. At another, it shows a grey line. At the third, a darker smear. He does not look annoyed, only confirmed. Tomorrow's check is justified. Useful days have been borrowing too much from maintenance, and the debt is now visible enough to collect gently. You help him mark those looms with plain cord, not black this time, but undyed twine tied low where the morning crew will notice. These are not marks of blame. They are reminders against forgetting. In a busy shed, reminders matter. People often think discipline means strong memory. Very often it means the opposite. It means accepting that memory is fragile and giving the eye a simple sign to keep the hand from wandering into habit. A low chord says, "Do not begin as usual." A separate tray says, "Use this and not the common one." A cloth pile sorted by touch says, "Do not trust what looks fine at a glance." The whole workshop is full of such aids. Once you notice them, it becomes hard to stop noticing. The shape of a peg tray, so pieces return only one way. The place of the ash bowl always on the left of the board, and never the right. The bottlenecks wrapped in cloth of one color when fit for pale silk, another when assigned to rough service. A world of tiny signals. You had thought the rules lived in words. Many of them live in placement instead. When the shutters are fully secured, the outside sounds become more distant and rounder. The lane no longer enters in pieces. It becomes a soft wash behind the walls. A cart somewhere. A voice. The hollow clack of getter on wet stone. A late broom. Kyoto does not become silent at night. It only changes what kind of labor can be heard. Inside the shed, the loom room has crossed into another state entirely. The lines of thread are still visible, but only just. The upper beams hold the last lamp glow. Below, the underframes are mostly shadow. That darkness has a different feeling now that you have seen beneath one of them in full afternoon light. You know what may gather where eyes seldom go. Not mystery, not menace, just old work, old oil, old dust, old postponements. The ordinary sediment of a useful place. There is something calming in that too. Machines do not go wrong out of spite. They collect history in the places no one reached this week. Then, one day, they ask to be noticed. The loom with the black cord had asked softly for some time. Now the room has finally listened properly. The washing woman ties off the last bundle of rags and says she will boil the fine ones separately at first light. Not with harsh soap. Only enough to lift what can still be lifted. She says old oil can be washed out of cloth sometimes, but old confidence is harder to wash out of the hand. A person who has used one rag too long will reach for another too long unless corrected. That is why she likes sorting in front of the helpers. Let them see a cloth rejected while it still looks respectable. That teaches faster than any lecture. She speaks as someone whose work has been misunderstood for years. You realize she is as strict in her corner as the foreman is at the ledger, perhaps stricter. Her decisions are quieter, and they travel further than people notice. A rag she approves may touch tomorrow's finest race. A rag she demotes may save pale silk from a mark that no one would ever know had been prevented. This is the shape of hidden authority in workshops. Not title, consequence. The mechanic agrees with her by saying nothing at all. He just takes the rejected bundle from her and places it with the rough wood supplies. That small motion joins her judgment to his without discussion. The room runs on many such small recognitions. You step once more to the black-cord loom's lane before leaving. The separate tray sits ready, fresh paper stacked square and pale, the fine bamboo tip resting alone. One clean cloth folded with its edges tucked inward, so no dust lands on the portion meant to touch the race. The oil bottle for that tray set back slightly from the edge, so a sleepy hand cannot knock it while reaching. Everything about the arrangement says thought, though no one will ever praise the arrangement itself if tomorrow goes well. That is another quiet fact of the job. Preparation is most visible only when it is absent. Still, you feel the satisfaction of it. Tomorrow's first reach will meet order instead of confusion. That matters. It may matter more than an extra hour of labor would. The weaver assigned to that loom has already gone, but his final adjustment remains. He tied the hanging pattern aid a little farther clear on the right side after the repair, exactly as the mechanic had shown. A tiny change. Yet it gives the left side rule more room to protect what it means to protect. Rules become easier to keep when the environment helps them. A wise room does not rely on virtue alone. It rearranges itself so good habits become the easiest ones. The foreman understands that deeply. You can see it in how the separate tray has been laid, in how the marked twine on the neighboring looms sits low and obvious, in how the caps were distributed during the rain rather than trusting every hand with a full bottle. Discipline here is not just refusal, it is design. For a few minutes more, the conversation turns not to blame, but to weather. The mechanic says the coming week may stay damp. The washing woman says that if it does, she wants the fine cloths aired longer and folded looser. The foreman says the morning route will begin at the rear row again, but more slowly. No one argues. The weather, like the loom, gets a place in the schedule. That seems fitting. Too many people think a workshop is only workers and tools. In truth, it is workers, tools, weather, cloth, memory, money, fatigue, and the feel of the season in the wood. An oil rule that makes sense in clear winter can mislead in late summer rain. A cup level that would be prudent in dry wind can become greedy in damp air. That is why simple rules gain qualifiers over time. Not because the old workers enjoyed complexity, because reality kept editing their confidence. The younger helper listens to this with the intent face of someone discovering that craft is larger than instruction. He had likely hoped there was one correct amount, one correct cloth, one correct response to every noise. Instead, he is learning a softer truth. There is sequence, there is season, there is the room as a whole, and there is your own hand, which must become accurate without becoming eager. That is not an easy trade to learn quickly. It is, however, a very human one. At last the mechanic takes his leave. He bows first to the foreman, then almost imperceptibly to the row of looms. His sleeves carry the day on them. A little ash, a little oil shadow, a little darkening at the wrist from underframe dust. He has spent years beneath machines, where most glory never reaches. Yet he walks with the particular ease of someone who knows exactly how necessary such hidden labor is. You watch him go and understand that the loom oiler's job sits somewhere between the mechanic's depth and the weaver's surface rhythm. You are not there to rebuild looms every day. You are not there to create cloth with your feet and hands. You are there in the middle, where tiny interventions either protect or mislead both. It is a delicate place to stand. The foreman remains for one final circuit with you. No speaking now for a while, just the small physical acts that close a day. A loose stool pushed under the bench, a cup emptied, a forgotten scrap lifted from the floor, a panel checked at the latch. Even this feels part of the same philosophy. A room left in slight disorder creates tomorrow's haste. Tomorrow's haste creates tomorrow's guess. Tomorrow's guess creates tomorrow's stain. Cause and effect are often this plain when followed far enough back. At the entrance he pauses and looks once over the whole shed. Not with sentiment, with inventory made calm by repetition. Looms at rest, tools stowed, cloths sorted, separate tray laid for the corrected frame, marked row waiting for delayed inspection. Ledger closed but not final. There is comfort, in seeing a day reduced to order after so much attention, comfort, and a little fatigue. He tells you then, not as a lecture, but as a simple fact, that Kyoto workshops often sounded strictest in the places where money was thinnest. A wealthy house could absorb one damaged length more easily. A small or middling house could not. So the rules in such rooms became very exact, not because poor men loved discipline more than rich ones, because thin margins punish carelessness quickly. That is part of why so many loom oiling instructions develop the shape of taboos. Never from the right side on formal work, never cold from the bottle, never a twice oiled cloth on the same round, never fresh on top of old residue. The language grew harder because softness was too easily ignored. And over time, when the original reason was no longer told in full, the rule remained with the force of something almost ritual. That does not make it foolish. It makes it memorable. You think of all the houses in Nishijin where such habits must have lived. Not identical, perhaps, one foreman swearing by paper in a certain underframe corner, another insisting a cup be left slightly low during the plum rains. An older woman at a washing line rejecting a whole bundle of respectable-looking cloths because she could feel one wrong stiffness in them. A mechanic who could smell old residue before he could see it. A pattern master who learned to tell whether a drag belonged above or below. So many tiny local wisdoms. A district full of them. Each one sounding strange when lifted out of the room that made it sensible. The foreman says there is an old mistake people make when speaking about craft in Kyoto. They imagine refinement means delicacy alone, but refinement, in a real workshop, often means restraint, not using what could be used, not touching what could be touched, not topping up a cup simply because one enjoys the feeling of preparedness, not trusting a cloth simply because it has not yet betrayed you. Restraint is harder to see than skill. Yet much of the city's fine cloth has depended on it. He says this while adjusting the cloth around the ledger once more, as if even his words prefer to arrive attached to a hand doing something plain. You do not answer right away. The sentence feels complete enough without agreement, and perhaps that is what the whole day has been trying to say. The strange rules made sense because they held workers back at exactly the moments when useful-looking action might have done the most harm. Warm the oil, do not pour at once. Wait for the second sound, do not chase the first. Come from the left, do not take the convenient side. Change the cloth, do not trust the familiar one. Lift old residue, do not feed over it. Use less in rain, do not answer heaviness with generosity. Every rule was a hand on the sleeve. Not stopping work forever, just slowing it enough for the right cause to reveal itself. You step outside with him at last into the lane, and the night air feels cooler on skin that has lived all day in wood and silk. The stones still hold some damp from the rain. The district is not lively now, only gently occupied. A cart creaks somewhere farther down. A lantern sways near a corner shop shutting late. From another building comes the muted clack of someone still winding or sorting after the main weaving has ceased. The whole neighborhood seems made of modest continuations. No dramatic endings. Only one room after another putting itself away. The foreman slides the shed door and secures it with the same economy he uses on everything else. Then he stands a moment, listening. Not to danger, only to whether the latch sits true and the wood settles properly into its frame. It does. That, too, is a kind of maintenance. You realize how much of his day has been like yours, only broader. He oils rules the way you oil joints. Very little. At the right places. Only enough to keep the whole motion from roughening. He asks what you will remember first from today, not what you learned in general. What you will remember first. The question is better than a lesson because it reaches for the thing that actually lodged inside you. You think for a moment. Not the ledger, not the foreman's silence, not even the black cord. What returns most clearly is the feel of the compacted lint ring lifting away beneath the frame, whole and reluctant, showing polished wear under it. That image contains the whole mistake. Something that looked minor on the surface had been storing itself quietly below, growing smoother and more dangerous each day because small, fresh touches kept feeding it. You tell him that. He nods and says good. If you remember that, the cloth rule will never sound fussy again. And if the cloth rule never sounds fussy again, half the rest will begin to make sense on their own. Then he goes his way down the lane, ledger under his arm, shoulders slightly bent with evening. You remain a moment longer outside the closed shed. The boards keep the day's smell inside, mostly, but not entirely. A faint trace of oil and silk still lingers at the seams. It mingles with wet wood from the street and the smell of night charcoal from nearby kitchens. It is a good smell, a working smell, not glamorous, not meant for anyone beyond the district. Yet you can imagine it lasting in the grain of the building for years, carrying the memory of many mornings like this, one and many evenings where some quiet rule proved itself again. Tomorrow will begin